Last month, an advisory panel with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommended that adults and children no longer receive flu vaccines containing thimerosal. It's a preservative that was mostly phased out of vaccines about 25 years ago, but it's still used in a small percentage of multi-dose vials to prevent contamination. Joining us from Denver, Dr. Payal Kohli, a cardiologist and medical director of Cherry Creek Heart. Thanks for being on the show, and we'll have to get the correct pronunciation from the expert, from the doctor here.
Thimerosal, Cheryl.
Thimerosal, okay, good to know. So let's start with this from your perspective. Is this a science-based move, or is this more political?
You know, it's funny that the spotlight has been turned onto thimerosal because it's been around since the 1930s. So really, this is not driven by science because there is no new science about this compound. It's a preservative that we use in vaccines, multi-dose vaccines, to help them, prevent bacterial and fungal contamination. So this has largely been driven by really a focus from the current administration on trying to avoid mercury because it is a mercury-based product. And so there's no new science to suggest why we're doing this now. But it's interesting because it's come up now in so many discussions.
Yeah, we see so many online forums, so much on social media. You mentioned it's a mercury-derived preservative. How would you respond, or maybe assure parents who hear the word mercury and immediately think something negative, maybe danger, even autism risk?
Yeah, this is my concern, actually, now that we're talking about it, is that people are going to fuel their vaccine hesitancy, which we know has already become such a big problem following the COVID pandemic. And so the way to think about it is to really understand what type of mercury. So the mercury that's found in fish that accumulates in tissues in our body, like the brain, and has potentially been linked to autism is methyl mercury. This product has a breakdown called ethyl mercury, so a different type of mercury that doesn't accumulate in the body. Now, in animal studies, ethyl mercury, which is what thimerosal contains, has been linked to some oxidative stress, but this has not shown to be true in humans. So the first thing is it's different types of mercury. The second thing is, as you mentioned, the product has been phased out for over 25 years, and yet we've seen an increase in autism, not a decrease. So if it was linked to autism, one might expect to see a decrease. So the analogy that I like to use is like, regular alcohol versus rubbing alcohol. They both have the word alcohol in them, but certainly one is safe to drink and the other isn't.
That's a great example. And this conversation is why it's so important to hear from a medical professional, to go a little deeper than maybe a 15-second video online, because there's a lot of nuances that help us understand the scientific issue and make those decisions for our families. Just to reiterate, is there any legitimate health reason today to avoid thimerosal in small number of vaccines that still contain it?
So for the majority of Americans, the World Health Organization, the CDC, and the FDA, and the American Academy of Pediatrics have unanimously said there's absolutely no reason to avoid thimerosal. Get the vaccine, get yourself, your children, your family members protected. Now, there are three sort of subgroups that may want to think about avoiding it. One is somebody who has a true allergy to thimerosal, which is very rare. If you're under 6 months of age, an infant under 6 months, that population is not well studied, so that's a group to avoid, and usually they don't get vaccines that have that. And finally, pregnant women, again, out of an abundance of caution, not because there's any scientific evidence linking this to autism or any other adverse outcomes.
All right, we are on the verge of back to school. Fall made me think of flu season. Could limiting these multi-dose vaccines impact how many flu shots could be available?
Really, it can. And this is my biggest worry as a physician, is that what are we doing by cutting off our supply chain? After the pandemic, we've already had supply chain issues. And we know that multi-dose vials are easier to make, they're easier to ship, easier to store, easier to administer, especially in low-income areas. So by cutting it out altogether, we may really choke the vaccine supply in some of those socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods, which means less flu shots, which means more infection, more adverse outcomes.
All right, these decisions we make not only impact ourselves and our households, but the communities around us. So we really appreciate your insight. Dr. Payal Kohli, thanks so much for the time.